Welcome back, everyone. We had such a great time in the previous episode. We decided to do another one. So if you haven't listened to episode 1, you don't have to jump out of this one, but make sure that you go listen to part 1 as well as part 2. We have 2 great guests with us today to talk about their book, The Great Dechurching. Jim Davis and Michael Graham are here on the show, and I want to thank them for joining us. Jim is the teaching pastor at Orlando Grace Church, and Michael is the program director for the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. At this point, if you haven't heard about the book, The Great Dechurching, you need to know. If you haven't picked it up, you need to go get it. This is the book that everyone's reading. They've done all this research, and it has proven so much about what you feel when it comes to why people are leaving the church. They have the definitive study. So I want to thank them for joining us. Michael, Jim, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us back.
Awesome. Well, I also want to thank our sponsor, California Baptist University. You've been hearing us talk about them. You should go check them out. Beautiful campus, great faculty, and a really neat program for eligible high school students. So you've got high schoolers in your church, certainly, or at least you know some. You should be telling them about this program because they can earn college credit online. In fact, California Baptist is offering the first class for free. Just got to buy books and course materials. And then every subsequent class is only $166 per credit hour, which, in case you don't know, is really, really cheap relative to the $613 per credit hour it would cost if you were enrolled. So you want to get your kids in this. You want to get your high schoolers in this because it is your opportunity to get that college credit while you are in high school. So you can go check it out at calbaptist.edu/PCC. Again, calbaptist.edu/PCC. There'll be a link in the show notes as well. Certainly want to thank California Baptist University for sponsoring the show. Want to thank Jim and Michael again for being here. We're going to jump into part 2. And I'm going to start with Jim, since I think I started with Michael last time. I can't remember. But Jim, this question is yours. What is
It was so long ago.
It was. Well, yeah. For our listeners, we do these back to back, but you're probably listening week to week, or maybe, I don't know, you're in your car and it just does happen to be back to back for you. But okay, Jim, what's important for local churches? You're a pastor. What's important for local churches or ministries as they think about the dechurching, and what categories do you think are most important for them?
So we have really begun to focus on stages, like what makes somebody at higher risk of dechurching. So as Mike said, I think in the last episode, the number one reason for dechurching in America is moving. So how can you have the receiving end and the sending end of moving. So in Orlando, we're receiving more people than we're sending. So what does it look like to mobilize the points of first contact, the school teachers, the administrators, realtors who are Christians, who are meeting these people as they're moving in? We've actually done some work to mobilize churches so that we can bring these types of people of the same vocation together at one time and talk to and mobilize this group. So that's on the receiving end. On the sending end, when people leave our churches, we have to help them find a church where they're going. A lot of them intend to do so, but don't do so. But just following up with people every 30 to 60 days or whatever. How has the search been? Anything I can do to help you? So that's some really low-hanging fruit there. Dechurching is also a lower income, lower education phenomenon. And which makes sense because when you think about these casual life transitions that are causing dechurching, let's say becoming a single parent, however that might happen, if you have less income and often due to less education, you probably will have to work longer hours. You'll have to work unusual hours, maybe Sunday morning. Life is going to be a lot more physically difficult, especially if your children are smaller, younger. And so we've begun to identify, somebody is a single mom, and especially more recently, a single dad or mom. We put them on our radar and want to go the extra mile for them, knowing how hard it is. And we've seen some tangible ways that's really paid off for them that we would have never thought, it would have never surfaced had we not seen them at high risk. Another high risk, one of the biggest high risk, is just being between the ages of 13 and 30. you have 3 stages here. You have high school, and then you have, for most people, college, and after that you have establishing your young professional career. There are different things that we should do and can be doing and are trying to do in each of those stages. But in our context, we're really working to come up with a comprehensive discipleship plan from age 1 to 18. And so we're not outsourcing discipleship from the parents, but we're telling parents, this is how we as a church want to come alongside you. And I'll give Rooted Ministries a big shout out. They have been a great resource to us, Cameron Cole, to coming alongside, to figuring out what it looks like to come up with a comprehensive discipleship plan. It's just been such a blessing coming alongside parents. And then really just thinking about parents in general. We did ask the de-churched evangelicals what role their parent played in their de-churching and what their parent might could have done to change their trajectory. And as a parent myself, I've got 4 kids, 9 to 15. I'm beginning to think very introspectively here, because a lot of what they were communicating was if their parents had just been more empathetic and had better active listening skills and embodied the fruit of the Spirit more. And we didn't say fruit of the Spirit on the survey, but we listed love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. And it was basic stuff like that. If the church had been a place where children can experience, can communicate doubt, can confess ways that they might be living contrary to what's being taught, but knowing that they're going to receive grace, all of these are kinds of things that the categories that we're thinking through and evaluating. Are we doing this at all? How are we doing? How might we grow in this area?
Yeah, you brought up new movers. And this is something that actually we've been looking at it at Church Answers. And by the way, just for our listeners, the research that Jim and Michael have done corroborates a lot of the research we have done. And I was telling them before we started recording, I'm a little jealous of their book because I wish I had written it, because it's such a great topic. But a lot of what they're finding corroborates what we have found as well in our own research. And this idea of new movers is something that I have really just started paying attention to as a pastor, because in Florida, it seems like everybody's moving here. I know what it's like in my community, and there's a lot of new people, and a lot of them are existing believers looking for churches. So one of the things that we've done is worked with, we've actually partnered with Outreach to do a new mailer, a new resident mailer, and it's really worked for us. So I'll put a link in the show notes for that. It's just been a really neat tool to reach people who are moving into the community. So that's something practical that you can use. So you should check that out. Link in the show notes to the Outreach mailer, and credit to them for coming up with a good resource. Credit to Jim and Michael. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in and just say, if you're going to, mailers is so much more, it's more effective than like putting something in car windows, because that, the bad PR the church gets with that. But having a mailer when somebody comes, people feel more welcome. I do just think that's a great strategy.
Yeah, good point, Jim. Certainly a good point. I remember back in the day, at least in my tribe, the Southern Baptist tribe, when you got outside of the South, that was a tactic. You go find the license plates of the people with, if you lived in Colorado or California or wherever out west, and they've got an Alabama tag or a Mississippi tag. They must be Southern Baptists. So we're going to put a little thing in their windshield. I don't think that tactic really works anymore. So not recommended. The Outreach mailers is a better way to go. All right, Michael. Jim briefly touched on low-hanging fruit. Tell us, because we have a lot of pastors and church leaders listening to this, what when you're talking about the de-churched, what's low-hanging fruit for our local churches?
Yeah, I'd say the number one thing that you need to do is you need to be able to identify people who are in that mainstream de-churched evangelical category, because 100% of them are willing to return to an evangelical church today. They want to return. The Holy Spirit is at work in their life. They are regenerate. They need to be back in church. They need to be under word and sacrament. And so, if you haven't read the book yet, we go into tremendously granular detail on who this group is. So if you haven't read that, just, go ahead and pick up a copy of The Great Dechurching, and you can get a lot more detail on, who are the mainstream, dechurched evangelicals. Once you just read that, just even that chapter, you'll be able to easily identify who these people are. And it's like, I could tell you story after story of people who are, you told us a story. I can't remember if we were recording or not, but you found one. They came immediately, to church. Jim, you had a story. Tell your story, on your front porch real quick.
Well, is it the one in front of my house? I have so many.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there was a family walking in our neighborhood, and our kids were outside, and we just started talking. And within 5 or 10 minutes, it became clear these are dechurched mainstream evangelicals. I invited them to church. This wasn't that long ago. They were in our new members class last week. They're joining the church. They're just delightful. Not that everybody has to be delightful, but they happen to have been delightful. And it was just, they had no church, and it was just that easy. And you can see their thankfulness and gratitude for the assistance to plug in.
So a similar story.
I would like to think of these things as. Sorry, Michael. I was just going to say, I would like to consider these things as sidewalk conversations. And the more sidewalk conversations you have with people out in public, the more you're going to find. What are there going to be people that are antagonistic to church or antagonistic to the gospel? Of course. I mean, the gospel can be an offense. That being said, there's still a lot of people out there that are receptive that may not be believers. And there's a lot of people that are receptive that are believers that just know intuitively, I got to get back in church. So an angry posture is not going to help you. An angry posture of, well, they left my church, I'm mad at them. That's not a helpful posture. What is helpful is for you to say, okay, they left. Maybe they have good reason. Maybe they don't. But I'm going to reach out to them in an encouraging way. I'm going to reach out to them in a way that is edifying. I'm going to reach out to them in a way that is not angry. And I'm just going to create a culture of invitation in my church. Inviting somebody to church is not evangelism. We all know that. But boy, wouldn't it be great to have a culture of invitation in your church? And what you guys have shown is there's a lot of people out there, 15 million, if I'm not mistaken, from the previous episode, 15 million people that are ready and willing to come back if somebody will just invite them. But Michael, you had something you wanted to say.
Well, what we're talking about here is people who can actually really contribute as well. And it's not just them who are missing out on church. We're missing out on their presence. So I'm impoverished because these people are not here. I'll tell you a story. 5 years ago, there was somebody who fit this, kind of mainstream dechurched evangelical, kind of profile, and no real reason for being out for a decade, came back, got plugged in, and we just installed the man and the husband in this relationship as an elder in our church. And so, we're all better off for, having him here. And it's just, all it took was, somebody just, taking a little bit of relational risk and encouraging that person to come to church with them. I think the book for us is a little bit more of an interpersonal resource than an institutional resource. And so I want to tell you about a second resource that we've created that is exclusively for local churches. And so if you go to the website dechurching.com, so just like dechurching.com, we built an entire tool for local churches. And because at the end of the day, we hope to inspire individuals to make a difference on this, on this huge problem, but we also want to inspire institutional churches to make a difference here as well. And so we put together a resource there that's a 20-point audit of how your local church can close the back door, open the front door, and send out the church body better equipped. And that 20-point audit deals with 20 different areas that impact dechurching. And so you can kind of see, okay, how are we doing, kind of on that. And if you want to make progress and you feel like you need some rails to run on, we basically there's a paid resource on there for basically 20 different worksheets that pertain to each one of those 20 areas that are impacted by dechurching that occurs at the institutional level. So again, it's dechurching.com. If you want to, kind of take that audit for your church and do that with your, your elder board or your session or whatever the, the polity structure is, in your tradition. So those are some big things of, between, having a process for when people move, out of your church into a new community, having a process for when people are and strategies and tactics for people who are moving into your community. So both on the arrivals and the departures, and then being able to identify dechurched mainstream evangelicals, and then kind of at the institutional level, go to dechurching.com, see, take the, go, get your staff team or your elder board or whatever the, the key stakeholders are, in your local church, and just kind of see, okay, how we're doing as an institution on this subject. I guarantee you, I mean, like Jim and I, we've had to make progress, on our own church. We failed our own, test. So, we're instituting changes, here so that we can do better as a local church as well. There's just low hanging fruit really just everywhere because the problem is just so massive.
Yeah, and I certainly I got the resource, and I used it as well. So I would encourage everyone. I found it very helpful just for being a local church pastor. So that's dechurching.com. Jim, so we've got a lot of listeners who are in churches that need revitalization. They've inherited a situation that was tough. These churches, a lot of the people that listen to this show, they're in churches that are declining. Many of them, it's just they just inherited a tough situation. It's 30 years in the making, 50 years in the making. Some of these churches of just cultural problems, antagonism, people who haven't done evangelism in forever and trying to re-equip people for the task of evangelism. And, something like 80, depends on who's counting and how, but something like 80 to 90% of churches say they need revitalization somewhere in the church. So as a pastor yourself, after doing this research, how can you encourage, pastors, and how are people using this book in a way that they find is helpful?
That is a really good question, and one that I can most succinctly process through our own experience here, because there are lots of churches that struggle for different reasons. It could be where they are, it could be polity, it could be theology, it could be a lot of different things. But, we made some changes here, some cultural changes, philosophical changes. We didn't change any theology, and it was really hard. And we had in about 3.5 years, 60% of our church leave. And so that might make everybody here want to wonder, why are we listening to you at all? But, if the church is a sink, you have a faucet and a drain. And for a period of time, both were pretty wide open. And we're just watching the water level, worried if we're going to be able to pay the bills or whatever. And it was hard. I mean, we really had, we started, we have our own journey, but at some point when the cultural transition and the philosophical transition had been made, the drain shut. It shut. And so, some things that we're doing differently. I'm wanting to make sure I and the leaders understand the value, and some people have always understood it really well in our church. It's not like I came here and whatever. There were a lot of people who understood this well, but the value of congregational worship, why we do it, the value of being a part of the body as a member, or if you call it something different, functionally the same thing. What we want to do with this book, though, is we don't have any anticipation that we're fixing this problem. We want to have a Lego table of sorts that other people with other experience and giftings and people like you can build on. I had somebody ask me, say, hey, Jim, I have this book that intersects with, or this idea for a book that intersects with what I do in Dechurching. Would you want to write it with me? And my answer was no, because that's not my expertise. I want you to go and do it. Go and write that book. He was worried about stealing our thunder or something, but we want to start a national conversation that we are living in the largest and fastest religious shift in the history of our country, and empower pastors in lots of different contexts to run with this. But some common things that I really do believe is important. One, all is not lost. We know how this story ends. The church in America, I do believe we have some losses, but I also think there's just some purification that's happening right now that is actually good for the church. And where there's a return in many cases to evangelism and discipleship. But what I want Christians in America to understand is that we're returning in some ways to what's the norm for God's people in the history of the church in the global East and the global South. And I'm thankful for the freedoms that we have, and I think we should pray that they continue. But the society as a whole isn't going to be on our side the way it has been, and we're going to have to exercise our influence from the margins of society rather than the seat of power increasingly. And yeah, this is the way God's people have done it for a long time, and it's okay. And we don't need to be scared, and we need to pray and shepherd our flock and equip our people for the work of the ministry.
That's a great word, Jim, and a good word of encouragement for our listeners. And man, this time has flown by because I've really enjoyed hearing from both of you. Again, Michael Graham, Jim Davis, thank you for being on the show. We've got their book, The Great Dechurching, link in the show notes. Also want to thank our sponsor, Tyndale. They have great Bibles. Let me encourage you to go check out their selection of one-year Bibles. So these one-year Bibles are designed to help readers engage the entirety of the Bible in 365 days. And the reason that that's helpful is because it's a tool that you can use to engage God's Word every single day. We should all be praying every day. We should all be reading our Bibles every day. We all know this, but we don't do it. So it's good to have a tool to help you do just that. I really like the one-year chronological Bibles. I find that it's just an interesting way for me to read the Bible, but they've got a good selection of one-year Bibles. So go to the oneyearbible.com. Again, the oneyearbible.com. Go check out Tyndale's selection of Bibles. I particularly like the New Living Translation. And find it to be not only readable, but also, if you're a pastor, reading it out loud, because we should be reading God's Word out loud in church, right? So it's a great way to read God's Word to your church. But the oneyearbible.com is the place to go and check out some of their stuff. So thank you again, Michael and Jim. Again, the book is The Great Dechurching. Awesome conversation. All you listeners, appreciate you as well. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, give us a subscribe. You know the algorithm drill at this point, but we would love for you to be more engaged with what our content is. So we'll see you next week, and hope all of you have a good week until then.